Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thanks for listening, sharing, and subscribing to this podcast. To note, if you want to support this podcast, leaving a review and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform is one of the best ways to help out. It gets more eyes and ears on the podcast, and definitely it helps us get discovered and have more people become aware of these great stories. In addition, I've got a Patreon. If you want to support in that way, the Patreon link will be in the show notes. It's really cool if you guys can drop a couple bucks in there. If you have it, and if you'd like to, that's great. But also, no pressure. Today I have a guest who is a linchpin in Baltimore's art culture, branding, design. They're managing the Globe Collection and press at MICA. Please welcome Allison Tipton, the manager of the Globe Collection and press at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I rehearsed that multiple times, and I wanted to deliver that one much like Ron Burgundy. That's what I was going for. Didn't quite work.
You got the name right, though, and there's a whole lot of words in that name, so we're 10.
But yeah, thank you for joining me and making this happen. We were able to talk a few months ago, and I was looking forward to this. I think, it's just really good energy, good chat. And, I want to at least, I always like to invite folks on that I think are like-minded. And for starters, I want to give you the space to introduce yourself and share something new and exciting in your world. And the reason I want to start off there, because I think it's very important for folks to really articulate who they are and what they're about. Like, I could say some words, and that may not encapsulate how maybe you define your role or how you present yourself. So please, introduce yourself and share something exciting that's going on in your world at this moment.
Sure. As you said, my name's Allison, and I run the Globe Collection at MICA. So if there is something day glow kicking around this city that looks like a Globe poster, I probably made it, or at least art directed one of my students to do it. So I'm a designer, printer, letterpress printer, screen printer, sort of jack of all trades, master of none. And I live here in Baltimore. I've been in Baltimore for the last 15 years. I've been running the Globe Collection at MICA for 10 years and change. I helped with the original acquisition of the collection. So I'm one of a handful of people who knows what's buried in all the boxes because I put it there. I'm super excited to be talking about Globe today.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Where did you move in from? Because, 15 years, you're kind of like practically a Baltimorean. But where'd you move from?
Almost, except my giveaway is that I still pronounce my T's. I'm from Connecticut. And then I came down to Baltimore to go to MICA, and then sort of fell into Globe along the way and had every intention of moving to the West Coast because I had friends out there. Yeah. And then I accidentally got employed, and then I didn't. And I've been here ever since.
I mean, Connecticut has a few T's in it, so I think that's why you're getting those T's out there.
It's true. It's no short T's.
So let's dive a little bit into the artistic and the cultural, because I always kind of talk about all art, culture, and community is sort of like the key themes in this podcast. So, as far as some of the aspects in your work and design, printing, where does your story like start? And, I have a sub question for that, but I at least want to start off there.
Sure. So I came to Baltimore to go to school. I was a design major, and I spent the better part of my sophomore year making really, really terrible work, and was like, well, I got to figure this out, or I got to figure something else out to do. And so I started taking printmaking classes, because part of my struggle with the work that I was making is I'd spend time designing things digitally and then go to print them and had no control over the final output of the things I was making. And so I started I took a screen printing class and a letterpress class kind of simultaneously as like I'm going to learn to like make things start to finish. And I really like the structure of letterpress. I think as a young designer, I needed rules, and MICA's not really a rule giving school. Like there was just too much freedom, and that didn't really work for me. The letterpress and like you're working within the constraints of the physical materials made a lot of sense, and I started making work that I really liked. And when you like the work you're making, you want to make more of it. And then I got involved with Globe as a student, helping to rally for MICA's acquisition of the collection. So the woman who was my letterpress teacher at the time, she's a designer here in town, Mary Mashburn. She runs Typecast Press. She was already kind of working with this group of people to build community support for the acquisition of Globe. And her and I were talking, and she was like, well, we're working on this thing. And I was like, well, what can I do? And she was like, I need help from students. Like, we need to actually convince the institution that students want this, and that I'm not just some lady who's trying to talk them into acquiring this collection of historic printing materials. And so I spent the better part of my senior year, I guess, not really making work after all, and hanging out at Globe and helping. I spent my spring break there, like packing boxes of type before MICA had even really like formally agreed to buy the collection. But we kind of knew it was on the horizon, or at the very least we were getting some of it, and we were going to cherry pick off like the best representation of the collection. And if that's all we got, then we were going to live with that. And then MICA announced that in fact they were actually going to buy the entire collection. And our work got more exciting, but also more complicated because, for context, Globe is not just a bunch of old posters. MICA is a craft school. We're not a collecting school. We don't have a museum. We're a craft school. And so what MICA was super interested in is the stuff that can be used to make new work. So the wood type, the hand-carved blocks, the face plates of all of the performers that Globe was printing for, old sketches, the tools of the trade. That's the stuff that kind of really made sense here. And we acquired posters and business records and all of the process work as well. But the stuff that MICA was super excited about, and the stuff that we could continue to use and to teach with, we packed all that stuff up and carried it over from Globe's last location in Highlandtown to MICA in 16 box trucks worth of stuff. And not the cute little U-Hauls, like the ones that are like the half semis. And in true Baltimore form, we started moving on the hottest day of the year. Those poor movers, like there was no air conditioning. The guy at Globe was like, oh, let me help. He thought he was like, well, I have this big vent fan. Let me turn that on and we can move some air through here. God knows the last time he turned that vent fan on, because a bunch of pigeons had nested in there. They're all sweaty. And we got like tarred and feathered with pigeons. It was a really eventful day. But we made it. It's been at MICA. Globe has been at MICA for 10 years and kind of growing and evolving and finding its footing.
And thank you. Wow. I mean, it's funny. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, it's like sweated and feathered, but tarred and feathered works a lot better. And and also I was thinking, I was like, are you going to do like, basically all of like Globe was on like Mayflower trucks, the way that the Colts left Baltimore in the early 80s. I was thinking of that.
Less dramatic, but I did almost get into a fight with a woman who parked her white Lexus in front of the loading dock. And I was like, ma'am, if you don't move your car, my movers are going to move it for you.
As one does.
It was not my like nicest moment, but we made it through. When you're hot, you do irrational things.
Yeah. I remember before I moved into my current place, the home studio I'm in now, my old apartment served as a studio apartment. So it served as a studio and an apartment. And I had my buddies help me move everything, but it was like the middle of July, and it was, yeah, literally the hottest thing, putting everything in one of those pack rat boxes, those big units. And just, I'm looking at them. I'm not really breaking a sweat, but they are sweating like their asses off. And I'm like, oh, this is what's happening. I'm a villain. I'm making my friends help me move in the hottest day of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the only way to move in Baltimore. Like, nobody moves in a cool month here. It's always like May, June, July. We're all a
100%.
bunch of crazy people.
And
Um,
I will say that the one cool thing that I did, because even though I was a villain in that, unintentional villain, right? Uh, I am bougie, so I got the really, really super expensive pizza. I don't really give money to my friends to help me do things, but it's either you can do it or you can't. But I do feed them very well, so it's like, how like you get the Joe Squared pizza and it's super expensive.
yeah.
I got like the toss pizza that used to be in like Govins, that's probably in that same price point, but the pizzas are smaller. And they ate it and looked at me and it was like, this is really bougie, but really delicious. So you really needed us to help you. I was like, I did.
I did. I think I survived. I survived moving globe on Di Pasquale's sandwiches and Hone's donuts.
Mm.
Um, I think I've successfully eaten everything on Di Pasquale's menu because of moving globe. And Hone's, which is now closed, but they used to be closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. And so Mary's husband, Steve, who was also part of the moving team, referred to it Wednesdays as Hone's Day. And there were days where we'd like split between we had the jars of change to pay the parking meters outside, and we'd like scrounge together. Hone's at the time was cash only, and we'd like scrounge together enough quarters to buy like a half dozen donuts. So it was really just like sugar and carbs that got us through that move.
Nice.
Steve also has excellent taste in candy. Like some people would try and bring us like carrots and like healthy food, and I was like, no, no, no. We're eating Starbursts for lunch. Excuse me.
So I want to ask this before I move into a bit more about the Globe collection, but um, what is, because I think we always have something that shows up early in our existence or in our journey, to sound super pretentious about it, that like something really early that shows up that kind of like caught your eye. Was it like branding? Was it a poster that really caught your eye that kind of gave you that inkling that you wanted to pursue art and design as a career potentially, or as an interest at least?
Well, I was never going to make it as a STEM kid, so I guess art. No. I mean, I've always been I was always a creative kid, and I think that it took me a while to figure out design was where I wanted to end up. I knew I didn't really want to be like a fine arts person.
Mm.
And my dad's an engineer and he's very practical. So he was always like, well, how are you going to make money? I'm not going to fund your lifestyle forever. Where are you going to get health insurance from? Like very practical. And I was like, well, I can go to art school and get a design degree and that will get my dad off my back. So it's sort of like checked a lot of boxes. But I think posters, I mean, in hindsight, I've always loved posters. I've always loved them in their very like tangible form of communication. And now I have a love of I love hand drawn like protest posters, because there's just like posters are very like, they can be very raw and emotional in a way that like things that exist on the social media are not.
Right. True. Very true. So yeah, the sort of practical situation definitely kind of moves us away from whatever the thing could be. I remember I wanted to be at one point a comic book artist, at one point an engineer, a chef, all of these different things, right? It's like, a Lego figure of me wearing a chef hat, or having the pencil behind my ear, or the pencil in my hand as an illustrator. And I just remember in high school, like my parents were like, so what is the plan? Like, it's like, what are you really going to do here? Because you're not going to make money doing this. And chose business. and kind of still had this sort of creative thing that was in the background. Podcasting became a thing that was very interesting to me, after a few years of being in the real job area, but it always was there, really.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how like the things that really bring themselves to the surface. I mean, before I really committed to my life as a designer, when I was still in school, I would go home to Connecticut for the summer, and I worked in a horse barn. And I've am not a horse girl, but I do love large farm animals a lot. And it was, I love horses, but there was never really a practical way that was going to be a career. I was not a talented enough rider to make it or really brave enough to make it as a professional. And I wasn't good enough at math to make it in vet school. So, it was like one of those things that I'm like, yeah, that was a really important, like horses were a really important part of my life. And I learned a lot because I worked in barns. I mean, my dad was not floating that lifestyle for me. So I worked for all my rides. Um, and I mean, I learned how to work really hard and I learned how to be really, really dirty. And I think maybe in hindsight, like that led me up to Globe and not being horrified by the pigeon and sweat situation. Cause I was like, this is really not even the grossest situation I've ever been in.
No,
So,
that's good.
I mean, I guess I learned how to lift heavy things and be really sweaty and dirty in the process. So I was just made to work for Globe.
Yeah, I think it is a thing where every now and again, I would talk with people and they're like, yo, you got a lot of patience. And I think it prepares me for like sometimes for interviews or even some of the things that you're dealing with, like funders or some of the behind the scenes stuff that it's like, this was a contract. All business, right? Because business, you're like, this is a contract. These are the terms of the contract. And now you're breaking the terms of the contract. And it's like, so what are we doing here? And trying to sort of navigate that, or even in doing interviews, there are some people who do a lot of the weird sort of, you ask them a question, I try to spend time working on these questions and having a perspective. And I'll ask folks like, so who are some of your influences? Oh, I don't have any influences. I'm like, I can name 5 of them and looking at your work. I don't have any influences. I'm just completely as is. No influences. Nothing has motivated me.
Full of baloney.
And in trying my damnedest not to call them out, like, you sure about that, bro? Because I see in this minute of your movie. um, so let's talk a bit about some of the projects that you've worked on, as a designer, and if you would, could you share one with us that particularly resonated with you or was particularly challenging, just something that comes to mind, and whether there's a story attached to it.
Sure. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my work with Globe that we have had a lot of really incredible clients who have really put a lot of faith, sort of blind faith in me, not really knowing me and just being like, can you do this? And me being like, yeah, sure, probably. I'll figure it out. But I think like each project, there's a lot of projects that have great stories behind them, some good, some bad, some weird. The one that kind of comes to mind recently, and this one's kind of fresh because it's a recent project, is they just finished the CFG Bank Arena downtown, and they had reached out to us to be like, hi, do you have some old posters we can display in some of the venue spaces, like posters related to the arena? And I was like, well, probably, sure, I can look around and see what we've got. Our collection is not digitized. It's not itemized at item level, so it's kind of hard to find specific things. But I was like, let me see what I can do for you. And I was like, by the way, we also make new posters in the Globe style using all that great stuff. Like, you should consider letting us work with you to make new posters for your events that are coming up. And I was like, also, by the way, I'm leaving for Japan in like 3 weeks. So whatever I know this coincides with the arena reopening, but like I'm leaving the country. So like there's like a hard stop on this work. And the people I worked with at CFG were just so awesome. Like, They were fast on their emails. And at one point, we got to the point where we were waiting on sign off from one of the band posters.
Mhm.
And I was like, the woman I was working with, Jamie, I was like, Jamie, I have to start printing. Like, I have to print. I'm screen printing posters one color at a time. Like, this is a labor intensive process. I have to start printing. Like, we've got like 10 days to do this. And she was just like, executive decision. She was like, go for it. I'll take the fall for whatever goes wrong. And those are my favorite kind of clients that are just
Mhm.
like, they understand that you're on a timeline, like you respect them on a deadline, and like we're just going to make this happen, and it's going to be kind of chaotic and great. And so we did posters for Bruce Springsteen and the Eagles and Earth, Wind and Fire for CFG's opening weekend, which like those are awesome. Those are, you know, everyone wants to do music posters for those three acts. Like it's great. It's awesome. It's a super cool thing. But just to like be able to do those and then have people that were like, let's go. Great. It was just like good energy all around. They were an awesome team of people to work with.
That's dope. That's dope. I love that as well. It's the I encounter it in the day job sometimes. It's like you're gonna have to do it, and it's like ask for forgiveness later, versus sort of this cycle of a version of procrastination. Like I'm encountering that now with a client and sort of the business side of Rob Lee Industries, and it's like, hey, can you work on this as soon as possible? I'm like, sure. And it goes back to the sort of contract thing, and I'm like, we have a contract, we're going to start in it, but that contract says I don't start working until a deposit is paid, and you guys have this timeline, but I haven't gotten a deposit. Oh yeah, we got to look into that. Okay, then we'll revisit me working on this. But it's funny because like we were looking at kind of knocking everything out within 2 months, and we're already a month in, and I haven't gotten any funding or anything like that. So I'm like, yeah. But if, this person has sort of the initiative of, I know the money is good, I know the situation is tight, we just got to roll with it. Because to your point about that sort of hard stop and that sort of timing, I don't know, we have this sort of culture where, and I think maybe it's the gig economy thing, but we have this sort of culture where somehow people think you're at their disposal, especially when you're in this sort of client relationship. And, it's like, I have multiple clients, I have multiple other obligations. So for you in working in that sort of capacity, how does that work? How do you navigate sort of that and having maybe multiple clients, multiple sort of competing deadlines, and all of the other things that could go awry because it's labor intensive, as you touched on?
It's labor intensive. I mean, I try to be as upfront with people as possible. Like I am always down to like try and find some crazy way to get something done like in a really tight deadline. And the thing about posters now is people don't use posters to advertise. Posters are now used more to commemorate an event that happened. And so they're often an afterthought. When there's budget cuts, it's always the first thing that gets axed. But when people are like, well, we need posters in like a week. And I'm like, if we can do it, yeah, sure, I'm down to make that happen. But I usually, like when I bid jobs, I always put like, this price is good until this date, knowing that I have you penciled into my calendar. And if you don't commit, then I'm going to fill your spot with somebody else, but also your price is going to change because now your job is now a rush job. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, I just try to be like, and because of the labor intensive nature of like how long each color takes to print, and letterpress is printed with oil-based ink, and that has a dry time to it. So when it's really humid in Baltimore, those posters need like 2 days to dry. So I'm not just working against like, it's not like, oh, I can print it tomorrow morning and you can have it in the afternoon. It's like, no, I have to print it and then let it sit. So we're fighting the elements, and it might be 24 hours, it might be 48 hours. Like it really, I'm at the mercy of Baltimore's weather. Uh, and so it's just like, for me, it's just like trying to be really upfront with people about like, this is the reality of the situation. Like I will make it happen, but you have to work with me.
Yeah. So I got this question, and you've touched on it a little bit, as far as like sort of like maybe the history. You mentioned the CFG thing and some of the like archive pieces that you found and going through the archives, if you will, and sort of the history around it. Share with us a little bit more about like some of the significance of the Globe collection, and is there a piece that you've come across that really like pops, like, yo, this is super old, or wow, that is something we wouldn't do anymore, or whatever the thing might be.
Ooh, we've plenty of certain things that we're like, ooh, that didn't age well. Um, for the blocks, I'll start with those since I'm now on it. We do have some stuff in the collection. We have a bunch of minstrel cuts and that kind of stuff that is taken out of circulation. Obviously, we don't print those except for in special circumstances where, like, I had a visiting artist one time, Amos Kennedy, who uses that kind of imagery in his work a lot. Amos collects minstrel printing blocks, and so like those are the kind of situations where that's okay, but like those blocks are not in regular circulation. We bring them out to talk about them because it's that's part of Globe's history. Like
Yeah.
they were printing for that kind of stuff. So there's elements of the collection that are like retired from use. Sometimes they're retired for content. Sometimes they're retired because the blocks are old and fragile. A lot of Globe's collection is made out of wood. And sometimes that wood is warped or chipped or really, really fragile in a way that if we put it on press, we could potentially do damage to it. So stuff gets pulled out of circulation for different uses. I have, so Globe's collection, like I mentioned, a lot of it's made out of wood. Some of it's made out of wood with metal printing plates mounted on top. There's another material called Ti Pi. It's TIPI, and Ti Pi is type high. So for anything to print letterpress, whether it's wood type or metal type or a hand carved block or a linoleum, if it's 0.918, it will print.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this Ti Pi material that's rubber mounted on wood. And it's a really cool material. It was a byproduct of the tire industry. And when it was like, artists now would drool over it because if you've ever tried to carve linoleum, it's really tricky because it's really hard to get good, sharp points and really fine details. And Ti Pi, when it was new, was rubber mounted on fabric, mounted on wood. So you would cut into it with an X-Acto knife and peel the substrate back. And so Globe's type, like those blocks still print beautifully. They print like velvet. And so that's one of my, okay, there's my first favorite thing in the collection. There's a set of James Brown blocks. And so it's a Ti Pi background. There's it's the background block for a James Brown poster. And so that's made out of the Ti Pi material. And then there's the wording, the fabulous, and then his name, James Brown, like the plates that go with it. And then there's the faceplate that fits into it. So I love that set of items that collectively makes up the poster design.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of my like most favorite because it's all these different elements. And Globe didn't save a lot of the 50s and 60s era posters, but the reason we know who Globe was printing for is because we have all of the faceplates of the performers and we have the physical printing blocks. They didn't see the posters as art. They were ephemeral. They were up one day and down the next, covered over by something else. But they were printers, and printers are inevitably like hoarders when it comes to their printing equipment. So they won't save the posters, but they have, we have 7,500 faceplates in our collection of James Brown and Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin and BB King. I've got a box that we just refer to as the box of Marvin Gaye's head. Really confusing. And there's a little Marvin in there. And it's just the silhouette. It's just a floating image of his head. And when I fly, sometimes I fly with that Marvin Gaye head if I'm going somewhere to teach a workshop or something. And explaining it to TSA while you have Marvin Gaye's head in your bag is really an experience.
Do they ask you what's going on?
It's way easier if you treat the head like you do your laptop and you put it in like its own bin because it's a metal plate. So it's going to show up on their scanner as a thing of metal. And then they're going to take it out and swab it and ask you what it is. And you have to explain that you work in a archaic printing trade.
That's
it's really an experience. It's something else.
that.
I've done this like a half dozen times with this block, and it's I've learned the techniques for flying with Marvin Gaye's head.
That's wild.
But there's my second favorite object so there's another Marvin Gaye's head that's probably like 8 by 10. It's big and it's made out of copper. And that Marvin is significant because copper, most of these printing plates are made out of zinc. Copper is a harder metal. And even when they were making those plates, copper was really expensive, which meant it was a long run and they were investing a lot into that block. So it was really a good chunk of change for them to have. And so we have this big, giant copper Marvin Gaye's head. And we refer to him as our patron saint. Because when my colleague Mary Mashburn was trying to talk MICA's former president, Fred Lazarus, into buying Globe. And, you go in and you make your intros and she's like, do you know about Letterpress? No. He's like, how about Hat Show Print, Yeehaw Industries, some of the shops that were really popular at the time? No. And she was like, how about Marvin Gaye? And he was like, oh, I love Marvin Gaye. And Mary was like, MICA could have this in their collection. And he's been to a lot of, and it's become kind of a running joke. Like the first time I met our newest provost, like I brought Marvin Gaye, this particular Marvin, with me. And I was like, well, he's good luck. Welcome to MICA. You're going to need it.
That's great. So let's see. I got two and a half more real questions. So, within your background and being here for, a decade and a half in Baltimore and being, around sort of the visuals and being around sort of like the history component of it, especially with the archive that's there and the blocks that are there. In your view, what is the visual language that says Baltimore that, like when I go around and now kind of having a sense of like what the Globe posters kind of look like, I see it. I was like, that's a Baltimore thing. That's a Baltimore poster right there. I do that. And my girl looks at me. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, you see that right there? I know the person. So what are some of the traits or the hallmarks of sort of that Baltimore visual language as it relates to design, posters, sort of that's what I'm looking for in that area.
Do you want Globe specifically or my thoughts on Baltimore as a whole?
Both. That would be great, actually.
Well, I think these things sort of overlap. Baltimore's visual styling is very loud. Like you look at like the giant Domino's sugar sign and the natty bow guy and all these things that we think of that are kind of kitschy and kind of Baltimore, but Globe fits into that. Like it's kind of loud and it's fluorescent backgrounds with black type on top. Like it's kind of garish. Like you're like, why is this here? And you're like, but also I can't stop looking at it. And I think that's kind of Baltimore's aesthetic, is just kind of like loud and a little weird. And once we decide we like a brand, we commit to liking it in a really kind of adorable way, I guess.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, because we definitely will get hooked on it, because I know that there are these different conversations, these sort of culture war conversations. I had an interview recently. We were talking about the 990 New Balances or what have you, and certain cohorts that tend to wear those. And I'll share that off mic with you because I think it's very interesting. And I remember reading this article about it, and it was like, folks in DC talking like DC's culture. It's like, yeah, this was our shoe. And then Baltimore tried to take it. I was like, oh, regional smoke. This is what we're doing. I was like, no, we love our brands. This is ours. Thinking about that. But it's really interesting how maybe certain parts of a city kind of grab towards maybe a certain style or a certain visual. And I think even with, sort of the bombastic nature, that's probably the word I want to use, or the garishness around it, we still have that DIY thing too. And it's like, oh, you chose those colors. That's the fluorescence you went with. All right, cool.
Well, and I think Globe is interesting. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about like Globe is part of the Maryland Institute. Like institutions across Baltimore have wronged people in their past, present, in their activities. And Globe is kind of unique. I always explain to people like Globe and MICA have like a mullet relationship where MICA is like the business in the front, the nice, clean corporate branding, and Globe's the party in the back. But I think that Globe, there's more to that in the value of Globe and the way we can use it as a tool for communication, because Globe's been in Baltimore since 1929. They printed for all of the artists, on all the jazz artists on Pennsylvania Avenue. And so if you've been around Baltimore for a long time, Globe's not new. Like, people going to those jazz shows are used to seeing these Globe posters. And so there's this like communal trust in this brand. In the same way that like go-go artists in DC also or like people in the go-go community recognize Globe. And like, if you saw a Globe poster for a go-go show, you knew that show was actually going to happen. And so Globe's got this, like, it's a little garish and loud, but it's got this community trust built into it that comes with its 81-year business history, that it was well known, it was well recognized, and it, in a lot of ways, like, in general, didn't wrong people. It was there to promote and be loud and kind of weird. And so I think that's kind of a special part about it. And I hope, like, as the current steward of the collection, carrying it forward, I hope that like the work that I make and put out, especially in like, not necessarily like the commercial stuff we do, but I do a lot of nonpartisan voter work, really working towards encouraging people to go to the polls and to vote and to do their civic duty. And I hope that like in that sphere, like Globe is kind of carrying that tradition forward, and like I'm doing right, or at least what I think at the time is like the best right way to like kind of for the community and like how we use these tools at our disposal.
Thank you. That's great. It's great to add that extra context there. That's great. So I got here's the last question and a half, if you will. Who have been some of your who or the what of it have been some of your like influences in shaping your approach to design, your approach to, or your creative philosophy? I'm going to combine the questions actually. What are some of those influences that show up in your work and how you may go about your work, or even show up in like the type of work that you really like look toward doing? As you mentioned with sort of the the posters around like voting or what have you, do you look back at like, I like this era from the 40s for sake of argument, and that pops up, or, what comes to mind for you?
So when I'm looking at Globe stuff, when I'm making new work, we always reference back to posters in the archive. And there's different eras of Globe. There's like the 40s, there's like the 30s and 40s era of kind of carnival posters and theater posters. And then there's the 50s and 60s, which is like the fluorescent bursts of color, like the stuff that Globe's really known for. And then the go-go, what I call the go-go era, which is like mid 70s to early 90s. It's much more linear in its styling. So, I mean, when I'm making new work, I'm looking at those different eras of Globe and the different people's hands who were involved in them and how they set up their structures. And we draw a lot, whether it's on a color palette or like a particular shape, or how they did typesetting they use typesetting to solve a particular problem for how names are laid out. I think having this archive of posters to look into is really, really helpful, at the very least as a jumping off point. But like when I make new work now, you can often point back to it and be like, oh, that's this specific thing, or it's drawing on like this idea. I think more broadly outside of my Globe work, I mean, there's a lot of people whose work I admire and appreciate. I've mentioned her in this before. Mary Mashburn, who's a designer printer here. Like, I mean, Mary has a lot of what I know about printing. My foundation in printing, I learned from Mary. And also she's one of the hardest working people I know. And so I certainly that has rubbed off, and has some of that comes from my horse background, but some of that stuff just comes from the number of times we left Globe at 3:00 in the morning because Mary was like, we can pack one more box. I'm like, like she's unstoppable. So like within Baltimore, like definitely Mary's a big one. More broadly in the letterpress community is really wonderful
Mhm.
in that it's a pretty small community. So you kind of, if you've been around for any period of time, you know too many people. So like poster people that I love right now are my friend Brad Vetter. He's based out of Louisville. He used to be at Hat Show Print. He now does his own thing, and he just makes like the most awesome music posters for a huge range of musicians. And like we have a group chat, and he's always like sending us like he'll never send you the whole poster if it's not finished, which I respect. Like he's got to keep his he's got to keep it on the down low, but he like will send these like little teasers of the things he's working on, and I'm like, give me more. And he's just got this great use of shapes and colors and how he like overlaps all of these things. And there's a guy, I'm going to butcher his last name. His name is Corey. I think his last name is Woznensky. He's a printer at Hat Show Print, and he's been doing this series of prints using letterpress to make musical instruments. And he's probably done like 50 instruments at this point. And his prints, it's been really cool to watch his evolution from like the really early ones to his new stuff and how intricate they've gotten. And he's like figured out how to work with all these modular pieces to like really represent instruments in like this really kind of, for lack of a, no pun intended, lyrical way. And then my last one, who's my she's sort of my letterpress printing girl crush. She's my friend, so I can say that. There's a woman she's based out of Miami now, Ingrid Schindel, who I went to MICA. She was a year behind me at MICA. And Ingrid is just like, she's a great printer. She has a really cool collection. And she's just always like, Miami is her vibe. And like all of her work has this like very like beachy Miami deco styling to it. And it's just so different than the work I make that I'm like, oh, I just want to hug your print collection. So those are my three people. Yeah, four people that I like really like admire their work and how they work.
Thank you. So that's kind of it for the real questions, and I got 4 because I've been typing as we've been talking. I got 4 rapid fire questions.
All
So
right.
as I like to tell people, don't overthink them. Whatever the answer is at that moment, it could change. It could be like, oh, can I do that over? No.
Okay.
All right. What was it for context? So, music is a theme that I've noticed with some of the posters you had mentioned. You mentioned James Brown. You mentioned Marvin Gaye. What was your first concert? I'm curious about that.
Oh, it was the Backstreet Boys Millennium Tour.
As it should have been. Hell yeah.
I was like 11.
Yeah.
10, 11. Yeah. In Connecticut. I went with my mom's best friend's daughter.
Nice. This is one of those sort of this or that. Are you more of a thinker or a doer?
A doer. I'm more of a do first, beg for forgiveness later.
You mentioned the Japan trip earlier. What was like sort of like a highlight that you'd want to share about that trip? I've never been. I'm studying Japanese right now. So definitely my ears perked up behind my headphone cans like, oh, Japan.
Oh my God. It was one of the coolest trips I've ever done. What wasn't a highlight of that trip? Do you want like a food thing or like a place thing? Okay, so we did. My husband is the planner in our relationship. He's the thinker, and so one of the food things. So we did a sushi omakase place where there's like 8 of you and they, one bite at a time. And I've just always wanted to. I've never dined in an intimate setting like that, and it was just like a really nice energy, and watching the chef work his craft with that knife was just like the most magical thing I've ever experienced. And also the fish was delicious.
No, I love that. I guess it's a I guess it's a documentary. It feels like a film. Sometimes it's weird between the two, but the Euro Dreams of Sushi, that whole documentary. And, I share a birthday with Questlove. So when I found out that Questlove flew to Japan on his birthday to have sushi at that dude's like sushi like place, I was like, I have to do that. That needs to happen because I enjoy sushi. I'm a big fan and I want to get like sort of top tier sushi. It's like having really good whiskey and then knowing like what's mid and what's swill. Yeah.
It really kind of ruins your palate when you come back to the US and you're like, we got one kind of tuna here. What do you mean you don't have the fattiest tuna that melts in my mouth? But we ate everything. My husband is a great trip planner in that like we did like Michelin stars, but also like food carts and the pork sandwiches. Why am I blanking on the word? At
Katsu?
the like katsu, the pork katsu sandwiches at like Family Mart. I could eat those every day. Like I'm a glutton for a fried piece of pork.
That's great. I mean, if I can get my Japanese stuff on point, like literally in the day job, like I have some coworkers who are Asian, and they saw like I had on my in my cubicle the top tier green tea. And they were like, "Oh, I was like, I've earned street cred." So I'm just the dude that's walking around drinking bottles of green tea, drinking ocha all day. Let's see.
And then the best thing we did was we accidentally went on like a religious pilgrimage. I love old building. I mean, I love old things, but we ended up going to a lot of shrines and temples, which was to do some of that was intentional at first, but then it became a thing where I was like, we haven't been to a shrine today. Where is that in our schedule? And like, we probably realistically went to like 40 or 50 shrines and temples by the time it was all said and done. Cause some of them are like right next to each other.
Yeah.
They're like in the same place. But he's like, yeah, we accidentally went on a religious pilgrimage when we went to Japan. And it was beautiful. And like, if churches here were like shrines and temples, I'd be more into it.
This is the last one I got for you. Because and I definitely I think that there's a like-mindedness here, but this is like that thing when someone's like looking for the job and it's like this is the interview question. It's like the last one, that's the one that's determining whether you get the job or not. So this is the last one. You mentioned donuts earlier. What is your favorite donut?
That's an easy one. I'm so sad that they went out of business, but Hone's Bakery used to have, it was called a Bird's Nest donut. And so it's a cake donut with homemade marshmallow and coconut on top.
That sounds delicious.
They were decadent. And when we were moving Globe, I ate that donut probably 3 times a day.
Wow.
But I was sweating all the calories out. So I was like,
need to carb back up.
Bring me my donuts. That would be okay. And then there's one, and I apologize because I cannot remember the name of the bakery, but there's a bakery in town who makes these strawberry shortcake flavored donuts, and they are magic. And I feel super bad that I don't know I can't think of the name of the bakery, but if they're out there, I love your strawberry shortcake donuts.
Those are both acceptable answers. I was hoping, because not too many people like my favorite. I guess I'm a basic B when it comes to this one. It's like, can I get a blueberry cake donut, please? Thanks.
That's acceptable. So where do you get your blueberry cake donut?
So this is where it gets decadent and like Fat Boy Steez. I like to go to the Amish market because they use the real butter. And the one that's like in Hunt Valley, I go there and I get loose. And I had a moment where, because I think like food and I think sharing things that you like is sort of like a vehicle for like really exchange and like building rapport and maybe even friendship. I was there with my nephew and I was giving him this example about money. And where he didn't have any money. He's like 13 or what have you. And I was like, I'm gonna give you $5. And he was just like, okay. And he's going to put it in his pocket. I was like, no, but you're spending it before we leave here. This is for fun. This is fun money. This is not real money. So we ended up going to the donut stand, and he's like, do you want anything? I was like, no. I was like, but my favorite one is the blueberry cake donut. So he gets his donuts, and he has like enough to get like 3 donuts. So he like just gets the 2 of his favorite, and I think he's going to put the change away and keep it. And he's like, and I'm going to get a blueberry cake one because I want to try what my uncle likes. And I was just like, oh, I just shared with my nephew. It felt really cool.
That's super sweet.
So left on a nice warm note there.
I like that. It's a good bringing it back. Donut pun intended. Full circle.
Yeah. Nice. It's good. So that's pretty much it for the full podcast. We're done. We made it through. We didn't lose anyone. And I want to do in these final moments, invite and encourage you. 1, I want to thank you for being on this podcast. And 2, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners anything you want in the final moments. Social media, website, all of that good stuff. Globe. The floor is yours.
Sure. You can find us on the internet sometimes. Our handle at most places is that the @, the @ symbol, Globe AT. Sorry, let me do this again. Our handle is Globe at MICA. But you got to put the little thing in front of us. Sorry, wow. I really dove off the deep end on that one. Our handles on social media are Globe at MICA. That
was great. I was like, what are you doing here? I was just going to let you go off that ledge right there.
Oh yeah, I just dove head first. Well, sometimes we always say our social media looks like Glob Eat MICA. But
true.
Globe at MICA, but it's hard to explain to people the @ sign. Whatever. I can do that again without giggling and falling off the deep end if I need to.
No, we're going to keep it in. We're going to keep all of it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't post on social media that often because I'm usually too busy fighting with the press. Yeah.
I'm going to close out there before we start getting real. Turn into a Patreon exclusive podcast.
Perfect.
There you have it, folks. I want to again thank the manager of the Globe Collection and Press at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Allison Tipton, for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.